Shalom everybody, my name is Daniel McGirt and I welcome you to our new in-depth chapter by chapter teaching that we're going to be doing on the Gospel of John. And this is going to be brought to you by Wisdom and Torah Ministries and Ancient Covenant Ministries. Now I'm extremely excited to begin this journey with you and to be able to take each chapter of the Gospel of John and put everything back in its original cultural context. And the reason that we're going to be focusing on this is, as many of you already are aware, over the last 3 years on Wisdom and Torah, Ancient Covenant Ministries, and Rooted in Torah, is we have been focusing on restoring the cultural context to the Torah, to the prophets, to the writings, and alongside with the first century writings. Now, one of the main things that Christian pastors tend to do when a new believer comes into faith in Messiah is they tell them to go home and read the Gospel of John. And I found out that the main reason that they do this is because the Gospel of John focuses so much on the love of Yeshua, the love of Elohim. And that is a good thing, but at the same time, when we go home and we read the Gospel of John first, and then we do away with everything in the front of the book, then we don't understand the actual context of what's going on in the Gospel of John, let alone the rest of the first century writings. We know this. So you and I now have a unique opportunity to take everything that we've learned in the last 3 years pertaining to the culture, the suzerain vassal treaties, the ancient covenant aspects, and all of the concepts that are attached to an ancient culture of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and so on and so forth forward, all the way into the first century. We now can take all of these things that Yah is allowing us to come into realizing all the things that we've missed, and we could take that and we could plug that into the background, into the backdrop to not only the Gospel of John, but also, I believe, in all of the writings of the first century. Okay, so I'm extremely excited about this. And I do remember my own experience with the Gospel of John when I first became a believer in Messiah. And I was also told to go home and read the Gospel of John. But I also remember that years later, when we were still going to the Methodist church, it was actually a Methodist Pentecostal church, if you could believe that. But it's kind of funny. But one of the things that this pastor did is he took the Gospel of John and tried to break it up into a teaching. But what he did is he took video clips from the latest Gospel of John movie that came out in, I think, 2005 or 2006. If you haven't seen it, it's not a bad movie. As far as scriptural movies go, we've watched it several times. I highly recommend it, especially after knowing everything that is surrounding the culture. Okay? But what this pastor did is he would take video clips and he would post a video clip of like 2-3 minutes, a little snippet of this movie to give people a visual of Messiah on the earth. But then he would never make the connections to anything historical or what was happening at the time of the first century, who the players were, who the geopolitical groups were of the day. He did everything the same way that most Christian theologians or Christian pastors do, and we missed the mark. Okay, so this is going to be our focus throughout this study, and I need you guys to be able to keep me in prayer and to be patient, because this is going to be a very exhaustive study. Okay, we're going to do this very slow. We're going to do it chapter by chapter. Okay, we got 21 chapters in the Gospel of John, so this is going to take us a while. Hopefully it's not going to take too long, but there's a lot of information that we need to go through. And to be honest with you, when I was preparing for this introduction over the last few months, I really didn't know how Yah wanted me to go with the introduction, because I don't want to spend a lot of time in the introduction focusing on all of the scholarly things that we hear from most theologians. Okay, we're not going to focus on all of those things that we could find somewhere else. Okay, I believe that Yah wants us to focus on everything that we've been studying together on the websites for the last 3 years to give us a much greater understanding of who Yeshua is as Messiah, as who he is as the royal messenger, as who he is as the one sent to proclaim justice and righteousness, and who he is holding the office of Mashiach. Okay, when we understand these things, all the interpretation issues that we've had over the years, over the centuries, all will fall into place. I believe this. Okay, so during this introduction, we're just going to basically set up what we are going to be doing through each chapter. Now, we're going to focus on 4 major themes throughout the gospel. Now within those themes, we're gonna obviously investigate many other areas. But there's going to be 4 main themes that we're going to focus on throughout this entire study, and we're going to go through them and give a brief synopsis on those topics. If once we get to those topics, I highly encourage you that we're not going to be able to spend an exhaustive amount of time on those topics themselves in the introduction. I highly encourage you to please go back and revisit these topics as we get to them on the website, okay? Because we've been talking about them extensively. I mean, extensively for the last 3 years. But now we're going to take the Gospel of John and we're going to put it in its proper culture and give a perfect portrait, is my prayer, ladies and gentlemen, that once we're done with this, let's be honest, okay? There are drones of people that are coming out of the church. There are mass amounts of people that are truly seeking the ways of Yah, okay? And if the Christian church is going to say, go home and read the Gospel of John, what greater mandate do we have to present the Gospel of John in its proper context? Because we know how many people are actually going home and doing it. I did it. I know many of you who are watching remember hearing somebody tell you once you first came into faith in Messiah, go home and start with the Gospel of John. Well, now, ladies and gentlemen, hopefully, it is my prayer that I will do a good enough job to where everybody will be able to take this information, take the PowerPoint, take the videos, and be able to take it and give it to all of your Christian brothers and sisters and say, okay, he told you to start with the Gospel of John. Here's the actual context, okay? I'm not saying we know it all, not by any means. But what we are going to do is take the areas that Yah has blessed us to show us what we've been missing and put them back in the context of the Gospel. Okay, so what are we going to focus on? You may already have probably a half a dozen study Bibles. If you're like me, I think we have probably 10 to 12 different Bibles in our home, half of which are all particularly study Bibles. I actually have one here that many of you already know that I use. This is the Archaeological Study Bible, and the reason why I'm using this one now is because of all of its ancient Near Eastern nuggets that they put in this version. Okay. With that being said, every study Bible, you go and pull any one off your shelf, and you're going to have a basic set of areas that each book is going to cover at the very beginning before you start reading that book. Okay, they're found in every study Bible. Okay, and those, just to give you a brief outline of what those are, you're going to have the title, which obviously they put who wrote it, when it was written. So you're going to have the author and the date. Then you're going to have a background and a setting synopsis before every book that each theologian or each author or editor of your study Bible is going to give their interpretation, everything that they've learned from seminary, and try to plug in what they believe the background and the setting is. Okay, then you're going to have a section probably that's close to historical and theological themes. And then you're going to have interpretive challenges, is one of my favorites. I'm telling you, go pull a study Bible off of your shelf and you'll see that you're going to have this basic outline at the beginning of every study Bible book. Okay, and then you're going to have the great old famous outline. Okay, now while all of these areas are extremely important, okay, and we can't neglect any of that stuff, but some of these areas are the ones that you can go and find anywhere. You can find all sorts of debates on when the Gospel of John was written, who they believe wrote it, what the historical and the background themes are. You can go on any theologian's website and there's a whole plethora. There's hundreds of theologians out there that have given commentaries on just about every book in the Bible. We don't want that to be our focus. Okay, I didn't want to take the scholarly approach. Why? Because I'm not a scholar. I don't have a college education, guys. I'm just a guy here in Kansas that loves the Word of Yah, loves my Messiah. I love being part of Israel. I love His covenant. I love learning the ancient ways of His covenant because I know what He has done for me. Okay, this is what I'm called to do. So we're going to do the best that we can with the information that we have without trying to reinvent the wheel, as you always hear Rico say. And it's a perfect saying, because too many times is we become teachers. Everybody believes that they're called to be a teacher, and then we turn around and we focus on all these areas that are divisive, and we build all of these studies up that actually are done 1,000 times over. Okay, but I present to you is, where is it that you're going to see that you're going to find a full commentary on the books of the Bible, like studying the ancient Near Eastern context of every book and placing every one of these cultural concepts, so the language, the idiomatic expressions, talking about who the geopolitical parties were in the first century and beyond, okay? This is what our focus is going to be on. Okay, so we're going to formulate everything around 2 of these areas. Okay, all the other ones, like I said, you can find anywhere else, but we're going to focus and formulate this entire introduction around the background and the setting and the historical and cultural themes. Okay, we're going to return the gospel to its original context. Okay, remember, context, context, context. It's everything. If we throw away the context, we're never going to understand what the gospel is trying to say. Okay, so I believe that if we hone in on these areas of the background and the setting, and then the historical and the cultural themes, we're not even going to do thematic themes, even though we're going to focus on 4 themes, but we need to understand how these themes were understood within the culture. Does this make sense? I'm hoping this is making sense. Okay, so the office of Mashiach, you heard me mention this a few minutes ago, and I think this is extremely important, because if we take the office of Messiah and we don't understand how Yah intended Messiah to maintain this role, to maintain the status of this particular role, then we're never going to understand what's going on in the Gospels. Okay, so the Gospels, as well as the rest of the first century writings, they must be looked at from a legal lens. Okay, now you can take this phrase and you could look at it, this is the way that Paul writes all of his writings. Remember, Paul was basically a historical ancient covenant lawyer. Okay, this is the major theme throughout all of Paul's writings. So now we can view, with that being said, is we can view all of the writers of the first century writings of the Brit Hadashah as being lawyers presenting the case to various groups, geopolitical groups within the first century, that Messiah has indeed come. Okay, this is what one of the main focuses for them writing down these letters. And there are letters that are to help the congregations grow, but the Gospels themselves, I present to you that they are written in a manner so that they can take particular elements that are attached to the role of Messiah and show specific geopolitical groups, okay, specific players in the first century culture, that Yeshua is the Messiah, that Yeshua is the Son of Elohim, Yeshua is the Son of Light, okay, and we're going to focus on this. If we are understanding the office of Messiah, then we absolutely must place ourselves in the culture in which these letters are written. Now, I've said this before in the past, and I truly believe it, is that, you know, the message of Ancient Covenant is for us today, okay? But it transcends the culture, which means that the culture that it was written in is meant to be understood, because they would have understood all of the language, all of the concepts, all of the ancient covenantal aspects, because they live in that culture. We're so far removed being in the Western civilization that we don't understand these areas. And this has been a big theme with us in presenting to you all of this information through the Torah portions, through all the topical teachings, through everything that we've been doing on the Wisdom and Torah Yeshiva. This is the focus, because if too many years and decades have gone by, ladies and gentlemen, to where we've thrown out the culture. And this is going to be something we're going to reiterate time and time again. Every time we do a video, every time we do a chapter, is we're focusing on the cultural, historical aspect to everything that's going on in this text. Okay? So the office of Mashiach is extremely important. Now, questions that we must look into if we're going to begin looking at the Gospel of John. Number 1, who are the geopolitical players of the first century? Number 2, what are the core issues concerning these groups? What is it that these specific groups, and we're going to show the list of the 12 of these specific people and what they honed in on being important values attached to what they believed. Okay, so we have to ask that, because if we don't, then when they come up, when Yeshua is interacting with the Pharisees, when he's interacting with the Sadducees, when we hear John the Immerser make certain comments about being a sons of light or the son of light, we're never going to understand the context and who those statements or what that particular chapter or verses are pertaining to and who he's talking to. Okay, we have to understand these things if we're going to get a full picture of the office of Messiah and what he is doing in those particular moments in those chapters. Number 3, what backdrops and historical concepts within the culture must be considered when studying any book of the Bible. Okay, we've talked about this many, many times over the last 3 years, and we're going to focus on those areas here in the introduction as well. Okay, so as we begin to go through each chapter of John, the answers to these questions are becoming much more clearer. Okay, so we got to bear with going through this brief introduction. Let me just give you an example. Ladies and gentlemen, when we get to chapter 1, the very first verse where it talks about Yeshua was the Word, we're probably going to spend 2 hours on that. Okay, because there are so many cultural elements to understanding the word logos, to understanding ancient cosmology, which we're going to talk about here in a minute, to understanding Yeshua's lineage of ascribed honor that people just they just blow by because it's a lineage. We're not knowing and recognizing that the reason why John's Gospels is mentioning that he comes from the Father, that he was in the beginning, is linked to his ascribed honor through his lineage. Okay, and we're going to talk about that towards the end of this introduction. Okay, now I want to give credit to my brother Rico because he's helped me to kind of steer this introduction kind of opposite. And like I said at the beginning, I really didn't know which way I wanted to take the introduction because I don't want to spend too much time giving data. Okay, it becomes dull, it becomes boring, and I don't want you guys falling asleep during this, okay? So I didn't really know which direction I was going to take this. And then I went back and I started revisiting Rico's recent series that he did on the first century context. And once I began going through this is where it clicked that this is the area that we need to present right now so we can understand who these religious groups are during the first century. And please revisit, if you have not seen it at all, go check it out. Check out his series on the first context, or the first century context. Okay, it's about six or 7 hours long, and I highly recommend that you go and check it out because it is extremely important. And the next few of these slides, as I've gotten from Rico's PowerPoint with his permission, and I'm thankful that he has done this because he's kind of steered the direction of this introduction so we could set up the backdrop. Okay. So, the religious groups of the first century, there was actually 12 different groups of people, recognized people within the hierarchy or within the culture of ancient Israel, okay? Number 1, the Pharisees. This is by far, the first 3 or 4 of these are by far the most popular ones because we read about them in the first century writings. Okay, so you have the Pharisees. There's 7 types of Pharisees according to the Talmud as it describes them. It says that 5 of them are hypocrites, and 2 that are good. Discuss as they come up, because every time that they come up in the Gospel of John, as we're going to see, that we'll be able to recognize actually who Yeshua is talking to pertaining to the hypocritical Pharisees. Okay, so we're going to be able to discuss all of these as Yeshua is interacting with the various aspects of the Pharisees. So we'll be able to pick and choose and know who he is actually talking to. Because remember, ladies and gentlemen, Yeshua wasn't against every Pharisee. He wasn't against every Sadducee. Well, maybe against every Sadducee due to their non-belief in the resurrection and so on, and some other elements, which we're going to get to here next. But he wasn't totally against everything that the Pharisees did, okay? We know that he took issues specifically when things went against the Torah, okay? When they went against taking care of the widow, the orphan, the poor, maintaining the weightier matters of the Torah. Okay, this is where he took issue. And we're going to see that within the Pharisees, and we'll talk about this here in a second too, is that well, not even the Pharisees, but within these groups, is you had the house of Hillel and you had the house of Shammai. And these 2 groups were almost complete opposites, and Yeshua didn't take offense with everything that the house of Shammai said, or he didn't take offense with everything the house of Hillel said. Like I said, it was only when those things that these 2 sects went against the Torah, okay, and they went against the weightier matters of the Torah. Okay, so number 2, our second group, is the Sadducees. Now, this is the group that controlled the temple during the first century, okay? We have to keep in mind that the priesthood at this time was a bought into priesthood. It was not set up the way that Yah had intended for it to be set up in as we see in the Torah. So we have to keep in mind that they're the ones that controlled the temple. So we're going to talk about the Sadducees as they come up. Now during the chapters when these groups do come up, is we're going to elaborate more and more on these groups. This is just to give you a brief outline of the various groups that are in the first century. Okay, so when each one of these come up, is we'll give a more in-depth to who these groups are. So we're going to use a lot of the stuff that Rico's used describing these groups coming up. Number 3, the Essenes. The Essenes were a group that focused, their main focus was purities. They believed that they were to set aside themselves into their own little community, and their main focus was purity. And they were also believed with, they called themselves the sons of light. Okay, this is one area that we're going to talk about in chapter 1 of this study pertaining to John. I personally believe that for a little bit of a time being is that John was living with the Essenes for a specific time when he was in the wilderness. But we can't necessarily prove that at this moment. We can only take what we have of the knowledge of this group. We look at the ancient historical writings that we're going to look into, Philo, Josephus, so on and so forth. But I believe that, like I said, is that he actually lived with the Essenes, specifically to the language that he uses. Okay, so we're going to try to make some connections there, but that's not going to be anything set in stone. Just going to be a little side area that we talk about. The Samaritans. We all know who the Samaritans were. The Hitmen or the Sicarii. This is interesting because this is basically, ladies and gentlemen, an Israeli mafia, because they had hired hitmen that they would have to perform assassinations. Okay, and we're coming to believe that Judas Iscariot may have possibly been a hitman. Okay, due to what he had done with the 30 pieces of silver. Number 6, we have the Zealots. The Zealots are the group in the first century that believed that they only had to answer to Elohim and that they were only subjected to him. Okay, you may recognize this term, the Zealots, from Josephus, or if you have studied anything pertaining to Masada, okay, and the holdout against the Romans during the first century. Okay, most of these people that were holding out on Masada were what was known as the Zealots. Okay, they believed that they were supposed to go and overthrow Rome in order for the kingdom of Elohim to come. And then you have the Herodians, and this was a group that was specifically loyal to Herod and Rome. We're gonna talk about that. The Am Haaretz. Number 9, you have the Hellenist Jews. These are the Jews that leaned more towards the Greek infiltration of the first century. The Ger Tashav, or the stranger within your gates. Number 11, you have the Nazarene sect. We hear Paul talk about this all the time, the Nazarene sect. And then you have number 12, which was scribes or lawyers. Okay, so most of these groups were all established in the time frame of about 165 before the Common Era, before the Common Era, you know, right after Antiochus Epiphanes and everything that happened during that time. So from that point on is when all these various groups began to establish themselves and establish a following, establish an authority to have some sort of say in everything that happened within the hierarchy of Israel. Okay, so we have this time frame, and this time frame is specifically where we're looking at, because if we don't understand what these various groups believed and what they did, then we're not going to recognize some of the hidden themes or the conversations that are happening, the reason why they're happening, the context of these conversations between Yeshua and these various groups, between the disciples and these various groups, between all of these players, and then the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Essenes, so on and so forth. So we have to make sure that we take time as they come up in each chapter to talk about those groups. Okay? Now, two schools of Pharisaic study in the first century. This is what I was alluding to before within the Pharisees, is that they had the house of Shammai, which had the 18 edicts. Okay, and then you had the house of Hillel, which is where Gamaliel was the greatest teacher of the first century, and Paul sat under him. And then you have Rabbi Akiba also falls into that category. But I believe that this is one of the reasons why Yah has chosen Paul to do the work that he's done by carrying the gospel to the nations, taking the entire complete covenant, restored covenant to the nations, because of who he studied under and because of his knowledge of the Torah. Okay, this is extremely important. Okay, because if we don't recognize that Paul is actually a lawyer and he's presenting the case to each and every person he's writing the letter to, Romans, Galatians, the Corinthians, so on and so forth, recognizing that he's presenting his case to those individual groups who Yeshua is as the Messiah and what roles he's playing, what status he holds. Okay, it all has to, we must take these things into consideration, ladies and gentlemen. Okay. Now, leaders of the Sanhedrin. The president of the Sanhedrin in the year 30 of the Common Era was of the house of Hillel, and then the vice president of the house of Shammai. So even though we have these two houses who did not necessarily agree upon everything, is you had the president was from the house of Hillel, and then you had the vice president of the Sanhedrin was from the house of Shammai. So in the year 55 of the Common Era, most of the Sanhedrin were Pharisees of Hillel's house. From 55 to 70 of the Common Era, priest Sagan, I don't know what that says. Priest Sagan the priests were Pharisees. No, that's not right. I don't know what I got going on that comment, but we'll just move on. I'll fix that before I post the PowerPoint. Okay, so another area, moving on, is that we have to take into consideration when looking at the first century writings is the importance of the context of the imperial cult. Okay, the imperial cult in ancient Rome was the worship of a few elected emperors as gods once died. The only emperor who declared himself a god while still living was Domitian, which caused scandal. It made certain deceased emperors to become gods become a prominent element of religion in the Roman Empire during the principality, to the point that some relatives of emperors were also deified. Okay, the reason why this is extremely important is because you have to take into consideration that there's no longer a Israeli king who's running Israel at the time. This is a king who's placed into power by Rome. Most of the time he was either a Roman or a Herodian, which we'll talk about as they come up. But it's also governed by Rome as basically Israel's suzerain. Okay, so and everything is within Rome is surrounded around the worship of the imperial cult, where they've, like the quote says, they've taken a few of the emperors and they deify them, and they basically set them up as gods. Okay, and within this context, just to give you an example, is if you remember in the Gospels where Yeshua is standing before Pilate, and Pilate brings him up in front of everybody. He says, okay, you're going to make a choice now. I'm going to either give you Yeshua or I'm going to give you Barabbas to set free, but you can't have both. It's up to you to decide who you want me to set free. Okay, one of the reasons why he does this is that, remember, the Jews were presenting Yeshua to the Romans because Yeshua has set himself up as king of the Jews. This is what they said, that he's established himself as king of the Jews and he's going to cause a revolt against Rome. Okay, well, in the context of the imperial cult, if there is another king that rises to power in Israel without the authority of Rome backing that king, it is treason. Okay, that means complete annihilation from the Roman emperor upon Israel and upon everybody who declares that Yeshua is king. That is a declaration of war. Okay, so all of the people that were in the court at that time that screamed, give us Barabbas instead of Yeshua, they all knew that if they would have said, give us Yeshua, give us our king, then that would have been complete annihilation of the people. Okay, because it's centered around the worship and the deification of the emperor of Rome as being the king, the one true king. And that king also, ladies and gentlemen, was known as what? As the Son of God. Okay, the terminology is nothing new in the gospel. Okay, all of these other ancient cultures all had similar language. They all had similar idiomatic expressions. And this one specifically, excuse me, with the title, the Son of God, the Son of Elohim, is extremely culturally important. And in these chapters, it mentions that. Okay, and this is one thing that John is trying to reiterate throughout his gospel, that Yeshua is the Son of Elohim. It isn't any Roman emperor. It isn't any Roman king or Roman gods. Yeshua is the Son of God, and he's doing everything in his gospel to present that case. To present that case to those political parties, those geopolitical groups that have not recognized him, or for new people coming into the faith. I'm hoping this is making sense. We're given a lot of areas to basically look into when they come up, but they're extremely important that we do this. The imperial cult soon spread throughout the extent of the empire, only left in the dominate after the Emperor Constantine began to support Christianity. So from the time of Constantine, the imperial cult tend to die off a little bit because Constantine embraced Christianity. Even though he embraced Christianity, we know what happened is he incorporated a lot of Roman stuff into the religion and then neglected the Torah and all these other things. We know this. But I'm giving you the time frame of where the imperial cult was at its highest and then when it began to diminish. The apotheosis of an emperor was an essentially political act performed by the successor of the dead emperor to reinforce the majesty of the imperial office, and often quite effectively to associate the current emperor with well-regarded predecessor. Since it was a propaganda tool focused on the leaders, the Roman imperial cult can be considered a cult of personality. Now I want to hone in on that phrase, to associate the current, or wait a minute, the majesty of the imperial office. Okay, all the first century nations understood, and I say nations because all of them understood this over there, the Greeks, the Romans, Israel, they all understood that this king of these particular nations had an office of the leader, an office of superiority. We recognize it as the office of Messiah. They're recognizing it as the office of emperor, and they are all trying to attach that same honorable status to that particular office or that particular role. But we're going to quickly come to find out that there's no honor in any of those nations' leaders at all. Okay. Now, with that being said, we're going to focus now on the historical backdrops and cultural concepts that we're going to cover in the Gospel of John. I mentioned four themes. Okay, those four themes, number one is going to be honor and shame culture. Absolutely huge. We've been talking about the honor and shame culture now for probably a year or so now. Number two, the royal messenger of the king. Number three, the macro temple of Yahweh in the cosmos and understanding ancient cosmology. What's the fourth one? Is justice and righteousness. Understanding that Yeshua is the one sent to proclaim Yah's justice and righteousness for all the world. Okay, when we understand these four themes, then everything else surrounding these themes is all going to make perfect sense. And any interpretative challenges that we've had over the years, over the century, the decades, we're going to finally be able to put everything, like we said in the beginning, back into its historical, cultural context. So let's focus, number one, on honor and shame culture and give you a basic synopsis on this. So this isn't going to be an in-depth, exhaustive description of any of these themes, because we're going to focus a lot of it when we get to the point in the chapters. And we have plenty of other teachings that are specifically surrounding each one of these themes. Okay, so honor and shame culture. All Western societies are formulated around basically a guilty or innocent culture. This is what happens in the West. Everything is surrounded around whether you or I are guilty or you or I are innocent when it comes to breaking the value system within the Western Hemisphere. Whereas most Eastern societies are based off an honor and shame culture. So they have what is deemed as honorable ways of living and what is deemed as shameful ways of living. Okay, and I'm coming to find out that originally I thought there was just only four main elements to an honor and shame culture, which would have been ascribed honor, acquired honor. Let's see if we can't pull that up so I can get this right. But I'm coming to realize now that as we get more and more in depth into this teaching of honor and shame and understanding its context, is that there's actually more and more main elements, and I'm up to 6 right now. And there are, number one, ascribed honor. Number two, acquired honor. Okay, basically ascribed honor is honor that you would get by the deeds in which that you perform within your culture. Okay, things that were deemed honorable according to a value system that was established by the society in which you live in. So it's basically your deeds, okay? Your works is how you gain ascribed honor in an ancient Near Eastern mindset. Or no, that's actually acquired honor. Ascribed honor is the one that is linked directly to your lineage or your family name. Okay, we see this with the Levites. We see this with the line of David. We see it with being a descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And we talked about this extensively. But that's what is ascribed honor. Is you automatically are ascribed a certain level of honor due to your family's lineage. Okay, now the third main element to an honor and shame culture is what is known as a challenge and riposte game, which is where one person is challenging another person's honor due to their behavior, and then that person that they're challenging is giving them a riposte or giving them an interactive defense to show them that no, I should not have my honor diminished, or I haven't done anything dishonorable, so I'm going to show this in a little game that we're going to play. And this is normally a game that is done in public, and this plays an extremely important part in the Gospel of John and all the Gospels, where Yeshua, as you'll come to notice, is that he does all of these challenges against the Pharisees are done in public, because they want everybody to see what is happening, because the culture, the society is what is deeming what is honorable and what is shameful according to the set of values that society has attached to a specific role. Okay, so this is going to be extremely important when we begin to see the interaction between Yeshua and the Pharisees, Yeshua and the Sadducees, Yeshua and the people of Israel, and just on and on and on and on. Okay, the fourth main element is maintaining of honor by means of our oath. Ladies and gentlemen, you and I have taken an oath, whether we recognize it or not, prior to even coming to Torah. When you and I became Christians in the church world, even before we went home and we read this Gospel of John, like they told us to, is that we took an oath when we said that we believe that Yeshua is the Son of Elohim and that Yah raised him from the dead. That means when we spoke that oath, is we said that we believe in the covenant in which Yeshua was walking in, and that we agreed to walk that covenant because we bound ourselves by our words, by our oath, and we used the Father's name to speak that oath. Okay, so when we don't maintain that honor that's attached to that specific oath, then we're bringing dishonor to the Father's name. I'm sorry to tell you that so much focus on being on the pronunciation of Yahweh's name is literally bringing his name to naught. That is not bringing honor to his name when all we do is fight and bicker of those things. So hopefully we're beginning to recognize that some of these things that we focus on within the Hebraic Roots movement, there's so much more stuff that we could be focusing on. Number 5, honor-shame reversal is absolutely an essential part of the honor-shame culture. Okay, we see this all throughout Scripture, where somebody begins to have an honorable status, and then they move into a shameful status due to something that they've done or broken the values or the commandments within the community, and they are shamed for a specific time period. And then once that shameful time period is deemed over, is then they are re-elevated back into an honorable status. This is what has happened with Israel, ladies and gentlemen. Just to give you a brief example. Okay, Israel started out with an honorable status through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Then they went into slavery. Then Yah redeems them, takes them from a shameful status of slavery, redeems them back into an honorable status amongst the nations, by taking them out of the land of Egypt, establishing justice and righteousness for this nation, calling them his firstborn. They go into the wilderness, they do the golden calf incident, they break the commandments, and then they're back into a shameful state to where they are now in the wilderness for an additional 40 years prior to going into the land. And then once that period is over, then Yah reverses their shameful state again, because he is so merciful towards us, restores their status again as an honorable status to allow them to go into the land in which he has promised them. And then what happens? We know this is the pattern, ladies and gentlemen. As soon as they get into the land, they don't do what they're supposed to. They fall into idolatry. Yah has to send them into exile, into that shameful status for a specific time period until he says that it's over, brings them back, reestablishes them as the honorable nation that they are supposed to be. But then we do it all over again. And this is where we are today. Okay, it's a never-ending pattern that's happened all throughout the course of history with the nation of Israel. And we see this within our individual lives as well. And I hope we can begin to see this, is that when you and I do sinful things and we break the commandments, is that Yah's judgment comes upon us. Unfortunately, that's the way it is. So he will take our honorable status away, so to speak, pertaining to whichever role we broke. When he redeems that time is over, then he'll restore us back to an honorable status. Okay, so this is extremely important. This also pertains to the office of Mashiach, to Yeshua. Okay, remember, Yeshua started off where? In the heavenly realm. I believe he is the pre-existent. I believe that he is the son of Elohim. I believe that he is the Messiah. And I believe all of these things. Okay, none of these things are an issue. We have to remember is that he was in the beginning. Okay, he started off as an honorable state, but then Israel is shamed because of our disobedience to the Torah. So then Yah sends Yeshua to come to be that part that helps to restore us back to our honorable status. But in the meantime is that Yeshua is shamed along with us because of our sins that we've committed. Okay, I'm hoping that you're beginning to see just how important these topics are. These are just the themes. Okay, we haven't even got out of talking about the honor and shame culture, and it, ladies and gentlemen, is embedded everywhere. Okay, one of the other areas that we're going to talk about pertaining to honor and shame is the importance of the meal being a covenantal meal, being a honor-shame status reversal. It's one of the elements that's part of that process. I've never seen it before until 3 months ago. Number 6 of the main parts to the honor and shame culture is honor and shame of roles and status. Now, ladies and gentlemen, there are so many roles that a person could have within this life, within a culture. You know, we have the father, we have the mother, husband, wife, son, daughter, teacher, student, so on and so forth. And every one of those roles, Yah has attached a value system to what he deems as an honorable way of living out that role. Okay? And if we don't maintain what Yah says is honorable to that role, then we are shaming his name, and our status and our role is diminished. Okay, we can see this in everything. So just to put this into perspective, if I as a teacher come on here and I focus on all these areas that are bringing nothing but negativity and division to the body, but I have this thing as a teacher that all I want to do is become the right one and be right in everything that I say and everything that I do, is that really bringing honor to Yah and honor to the value system that he's attached, that we see to being a teacher? It doesn't. It actually diminishes that role, diminishes me as a covenantal person within Israel, and my role as a teacher would be diminished amongst the brethren. Okay, so you see how this begins to make sense, and we could see this with every one of those roles that I just mentioned. If as a father, if as a mother, if we don't maintain that value system and keeping what Yah says is right within that role, then we are bringing dishonor to him and dishonor to ourselves. And he's no longer going to allow us to continue to have that role. It's the same thing with Israel as a whole. If Israel as a whole, think about this, if Israel as a whole does not know how to get along, does not know how to be unified, does not know how to take Yah's word and to glorify him, to glorify his Messiah, and to focus on living the way in which he's attached to Israel living in an honorable manner, then what is he going to do? He's going to shame Israel. He's going to shame you and I, because we're not doing that, and we're actually bringing dishonor to his name. Okay? Now, these are just some of the areas that are focusing around an honor and shame cultural society that we have to understand to really get the complete context and a complete understanding to the gospel, to actually, in my mind, to any book in the Bible at this point. The honor and shame culture is, we cannot go without it any longer. I don't know how we've done it for so long. Baruch Hashem for allowing us to see it now. Okay, so honor and shame culture, extremely important, and it's going to come up a lot in this study. What is our next topic? The royal messenger of the king. This is a topic that I did some study on a year or so ago, 2 years maybe, that completely turned my life inside out. And the reason for that is because when we began to study the ancient Near East and study the various roles and the various aspects to suzerain vassal treaties and ancient covenants, the royal grant covenants, land grants, and all these other things, is that we began to see that there is a hierarchy within the kingdom. And I don't know if I'm giving you these themes specifically in the order in which we should be giving them to you, but it's okay, because all of them are placed, they have the same significant amount of importance that we need to talk about. But when we begin to see that there's an actual hierarchy to a kingdom, and that we all believe that Yeshua is coming back to rule and reign on the earth for 1,000 years, and we all believe this, Christianity all believes this, but the question I propose to you is that if we believe this, what is the form of government in which Yeshua is going to rule by? He has to have a government. It isn't just we're sitting on some clouds playing some harps, guys. We know this. So we recognize now that there is a hierarchy to the kingdom. It doesn't diminish the role of Messiah. It doesn't diminish Yeshua in any way. It's placing him in his proper role within the hierarchy of the kingdom. And if you look at any ancient Near Eastern kingdom, as you begin to see that there are specific offices, there's roles within that kingdom, within the hierarchy, that each one plays. The royal messenger is one of the top positions within a hierarchy of a kingdom. And the reason for that is because we have to keep in mind is that ancient nations didn't intermingle like we see today with, we just turn on Fox News or CNN or any other TV station. We see world leaders interacting with each other. We see a picture of president talking on the phone when he's in his office to another president over across the world. Things didn't work like that, obviously, 2, 3, 4,000 years ago. Okay, most of the time the kings were going to war. They were leading their people into war or on campaigns against other nations. And whenever they wanted to intermingle with one another, they sent what was known as the royal messenger. Okay, the royal messenger, when he was sent, he was a representation of the king. Okay, one of my favorite phrases that I'm coming to use describing our Messiah, our Yeshua, is something that I heard just the other day again, which I've seen this movie on the book of Esther, One Night with the King, several times. Our family watches it during Purim. And one phrase that they use in there, and I've seen it used in other areas and other commentaries, is what is known as the Prince of the Face. Okay, and what that means is that messenger what is known as a prince in the kingdom. Okay, we see this in the book of Revelation. Revelation chapter 1 describes Yeshua as the prince. But this prince is known as the royal messenger, and they actually have all the authority of the great king in which sends them. It means that everything that they do has to be in line with the king that sent them. It has to be in line with the letter that the king sent them. Okay, what letter did Yeshua bring with him to fulfill? The Torah. If he does anything outside the letter in which the king gave him to go with him to bring the message of the restoration, then he can't be the Messiah. And we know that Yeshua did those things, as he kept the commandments. He did everything according to the Torah. Okay, so the royal messenger of the king has to maintain the authority of the king who sent him. And if anything happens to that messenger, when he goes to the people that he's bringing the message to, anything that happens to him, one hair is harmed on his head, any injury comes to him, if they decide that they're going to rebel against the king's messenger and they kill him, that is an affront to the king in which the royal messenger was sent from, and that means complete annihilation upon that nation. Okay, you can see elements, and I've shared some of this stuff before. In the movie 300, we see this, where the messenger comes from the one nation to present a message to a specific people. The other people, they reject him. They actually kick the messenger down this giant cistern, and which ends up leading to war. Okay, whether regardless or not the account is historically accurate is not really relevant right now. The point is that you can actually see it, and they recognize that most people can see that this was indeed the norm within these nations. The royal messenger is the messenger of the covenant. Okay, Yeshua is the pre-existent. He's the Memra. Okay, every time you see messenger in the Torah, is linked to this type of authority that is attached to that role. All of the prophets, ladies and gentlemen, every single prophet that we read about was a royal messenger of Yah. That means that they have more authority on the earth than the kings of Israel at that time. Why? Why would Yah be sending a prophet to the kings if the kings had more authority than the prophets? Because the kings were in rebellion. He sends the royal messenger to bring a word of repentance, and tries to get the king in the hierarchy of the kingdom of Israel on the earth and the people of Israel to come back into repentance and to have the covenant restored. Okay? And if anything happens to those prophets, like we just said, that's an affront to Yah. Okay? This is what leads to exile. This is what leads to punishment. So this is where I think that we need to be careful. Are we going around attaching the word prophet to every single teacher that comes down the pike? Ladies and gentlemen, I believe that you and I are called to be messengers of the King. Okay? Whether or not we have the same royal messenger status as the prophets or as the 12 Talmudim that we see about in the first century writings, I'm not so sure about that. Okay? Those specific titles, those roles of prophets, those royal messengers had a specific honorable value system attached to that role. And I don't believe that you and I can go around just saying that we're prophets and we're the watchmen on the wall and that we're going around doing these things when we won't even return ourselves to the actual context of these letters in which we're talking about. Okay? There is an honorable status attached to every single role in the Bible. We have to maintain that honorable status. If we don't, we're shaming the Father. We're shaming Yeshua. We're shaming ourselves as covenant people. Okay? So the royal messenger is extremely important in the Gospels, obviously, because this is one of the cases that they're making, is that Yeshua is the sent one. Okay, this is all throughout the Gospel of John, and we're going to talk about this and hone in on this theme specifically so people can realize that Yeshua is the messenger. Look, ladies and gentlemen, it's rampant right now of the amount of people that are so amped to just walk away from Yeshua and dismiss him as the Messiah. Because we come into the Torah, we come into this desire that we want to have community, we want to be part of something greater than us, we want to go back and return to the Torah and living this lifestyle community within our brothers of Judah, and that's perfectly fine. But at what cost are we going to do that? Okay? I implore you to please take time to go through this study with us. This is another reason why I feel that this study is so important. Because not only for those people that already believe that there's a Messiah, that are coming out of the church who just don't know the Torah. They don't know the historical aspect to the first century writings. But on the whole other end of the yardstick here is that we have a group of people who are on the verge, if not have already done it. We know how there's many people that have already done it, but there's many more people that those people are trying to lead away from Messiah. But if these people don't actually study the context for themselves either, then they're going to be able to take as many as they want. So now you and I have a specific mandate to make sure that everything that we read about, we present it in this culture, and we investigate every single angle, instead of just saying, oh, okay, I see what they say about that one verse. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm convinced there's no denying who Yeshua is any longer. Okay? He is the Son of Elohim. He is divine. He is from the beginning. Okay? This is not an issue. You do not have to worry about any of this in this teaching. We are going to do nothing but elevate the status of Messiah, elevate the status of Yah in order to bring honor and glory to them. That is my prayer for this entire teaching. Okay? So the royal messenger. The macro temple of Yah in ancient cosmology. This topic here alone we could spend probably 3 hours on, but I'm going to give you a brief synopsis on what the macro temple is, what ancient cosmology is, because we're going to talk about this in the very first chapter. Okay. One of the things that either religions, either dogmas do is that we either focus mainly on either this warm, fuzzy, kind of mystical temple in the heavens, and we do away with the earthly temple. Or on the other end of the spectrum is we focus only on this earthly temple, this physical reality that we could see, we could feel, smell, and touch, and not really focus so much on what happens in the heavenly realm because of what our sin does to it. I present to you, ladies and gentlemen, that we're supposed to look at both temples, the earthly and the heavenly, as interwoven amongst each other. One does not cancel out the other. Okay? And if we do not realize what the sacrificial system does and what everything that happens in the earthly temple is meant to show us something else in the heavenly temple, then we're going to miss the boat, and we're going to have issues with understanding what Yeshua has done for this. Ladies and gentlemen, I thought I knew what the blood of Yeshua did for me for 20 years now. Until 2 years ago when we started studying the book of Leviticus and going through the cultural understanding of blood sacrifice and what the blood actually does in a temple realm. Ladies and gentlemen, I couldn't do anything until we got done studying the book of Leviticus, because I was so focused and honed in on trying to grasp. How can I teach anybody anything about the Messiah if I don't even understand what his blood has done for me? Because we don't. Let's be honest. We don't know what it's done for us. And we're going to talk a lot about what his blood has done for us. Because when you understand that the temple in the heavenly realm, remember, Moshe was told, everything that I show you to build the earthly tabernacle and the earthly temple, you do it as a pattern of what? Of what I've shown you in the heavenly realm. It's all throughout Scripture. It's in there like 6, 7, 8 times. We know that the earthly temple is a pattern after what was seen in the heavenly realms. Okay? So that means that both temples are functioning. But what is the function of the earthly temple? And then what is the function of the heavenly temple? Okay? I present to you, and you have to go back and you have to reinvestigate this, because like I said, this topic alone, we could spend 3 hours, but we also could do this for 3 weeks non-stop. There's that much information pertaining to understanding temple service. Okay, we've been talking about this for 3 years. I highly encourage you to study this stuff with us. Go back over the last 3 years of everything we've done on Wisdom and Torah, and if you're new to the website, I highly encourage you to start with the Torah portions each year with us. And there's a lot of information, but it's all there, and you can study it at your own pace. But the macro temple and the earthly temple each have their own functions, okay? And I present to you that everything that is done in the earthly temple is meant to show us that there is impurities within the camp, okay? Remember, there is no sacrifice for open, willful rebellion. It was death, okay? If you committed an open, willful rebellion, murdered, idolatry, any of those things, you were dead. They killed you. There's no sacrifice for that. The only time there was a sacrifice for willful sin was when? It was on Yom Kippur. And why is that? That is because the sin of that stain, the stain of that sin, I should say, remains on all 3 of those altars until Yom Kippur. Okay, because I don't know if you remember or not, but in Leviticus it shows that all 3 altars in the temple were purged on Yom Kippur. And that is to remove the stain that you and I cannot see of what our sin does to each one of those altars. Okay? So even though that sin of that stain is, or that stain of that sin is removed on Yom Kippur, it still doesn't deal with the issue of eternal life, restoration for that person who died, or any of those things. There has to be something that takes care of those things, because Yah made a promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that he was going to restore Israel, and he would resurrect the sons of the promise, the children of the promise. Okay? So that he has to bring resurrection. Well, how can he do that if all of us have committed open willful rebellion? The earthly tabernacle hasn't dealt with that issue. So ladies and gentlemen, I present to you that the macro temple and the cosmos, which the cosmos is basically a giant size, it's a macro temple, okay? If you look at and you study at some of the elements pertaining to what is inside the earthly temple, is that the earthly temple is known as a microcosmos, because each one of those elements was describing something that was happening in the heavenly realm, okay? So you have the earthly temple as a microcosm of the macro temple of the cosmos in the heavenly realm. Okay, so if we understand all these things of what our sin does to the earthly tabernacle, and that when we have impurities, that is also considered staining the altars, that's what the earthly tabernacle is dealing with. That's what the blood sacrificial system is dealing with in the earthly realm. But what happens in the heavenly realm? If we can't see the stain of what our sins are doing in the earthly realm, then how would we be able to see what's happening in the heavenly realm? Okay, the best way for me to analogy to give you is it's like you have electricity going through water. Okay, if you run electricity through a swimming pool, you may not be able to see the electricity is there, but you know if you touch it, you're going to get zapped, right? This is what is known as indexing. Okay, you and I, or Israel, I mean, I don't know if it's necessarily at this moment, but Israel is indexed to the temple, which means that everything that they do, because they've come into a covenant, they come into an oath, they've done the blood to seal the covenant, and so on and so forth. That means that they are now indexed to the temple, which means that anything they do, any impurities that they cause, any sin that they cause, it penetrates and stains the altars of the temple. It's the same thing in the heavenly realm. Okay, but we're still dealing with the willful open rebellion. Okay, remember we said that there was no sacrifice for open rebellion in the earthly temple system. It was death. So now we have to ask the question, well, how can we have restoration and resurrection if that sin is not dealt with in the heavenly realm? Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you that this is the purpose that one of the purposes that Yeshua has come. This is one of the purposes for his blood. Okay, and we're going to go in depth with this as it comes up. But his blood actually is the only blood sufficient enough to wipe the stain of yours and mine and all of history's and all of the future's sins from the heavenly altars. Okay, with that happening, now we have the ability, because he has removed that stain, Yeshua has been resurrected, to now we have the ability to, by the Father's mercies and grace, to be able to come back into covenant and to stop sinning. Okay, this is what I'm trying to get you guys to see, is that you can't throw out one temple in exchange for the other. They're meant to work together. This is the same with the priesthood. We have teachings going around, people saying the Levitical priesthood is done away with. Ladies and gentlemen, the Levitical priesthood, the Aaronic priesthood, and the Levites were meant to participate in the functioning roles of the earthly temple. It's a grant given to them. Yah can't take it away. He made the decree. Okay, he cannot take it away. And when the temple stands again, there will be Levites working in the temple area. Okay, even though Yeshua is in there. Yeshua comes from a much greater priesthood, the Melchizedek priesthood, which comes from the heavenly realm, which means he is the only one that can remove our stain from the heavenly realm, because he comes from a greater priesthood. And he is the one interceding as our high priest right now before he returns to become the crowned king on the earth. I'm hoping this is making sense, because this is the type of terminology, ladies and gentlemen, that we see in the Gospels. They're presenting the case to these groups, to these priestly groups, the priestly groups that don't belong in the temple for that matter. Remember, the Sadducees, they didn't believe in resurrection. How you can officiate in a temple and not believe in resurrection is beyond me. I can't fathom this at all. But hey, I don't know. Maybe we'll be able to figure that one out a little better as we come up on the Sadducees. So this is extremely important, because now we'll be able to recognize and be able to discuss the blood of Yeshua and what his blood actually came to do for us. Okay, it doesn't negate the earthly tabernacle. The reason why the earthly tabernacle was destroyed is because Israel rejected the royal messenger. You cannot reject the royal messenger, kill him, say his message is no good, and then expect the king's house to still stand in which it sent him. It doesn't work that way. Okay? You see how just what we're talking about in this hour is so important to understanding any book in the Bible, specifically the Gospels. Okay? We've got a mandate, ladies and gentlemen. We have a mandate. So the ancient cosmology part of this is what all of these ancient nations believed on how the cosmos came into existence, and which gods ran the cosmos and their temples in the heavenly realm, and the government in which they established. Okay, temples are nothing new to Israel, ladies and gentlemen. All the ancient Near Eastern nations had them. The Egyptians, the Hittites, Canaanites, all of them. They all had these temples. It was where their views were skewed. And we know that everything that we teach, everything that we share and that we learn, there has to be a distinction between what Yah is doing in the Bible and what the ancient pagan nations are doing. And ladies and gentlemen, I can testify to you that this is true. I know that every area that we have studied over the last 3 years, when anything looks like it's comparing, there's nothing wrong with comparative studies. Okay, there's nothing wrong with it. You absolutely have to do comparative studies in order to understand, well, what did this culture believe? Well, what did this culture believe? Oh, now I see why Yah is doing this, and here's the distinction between what these two nations believe. Okay, it's that simple. So the ancient cosmology aspect is what these nations believed on how the cosmos was structured. And this pertains specifically to the temple and the cosmos. Okay, and we're going to talk a lot more about this, specifically directly linked to one important area of the resurrection. I mean, like I said, I don't know how people can officiate in the temple and not even believe there's a resurrection. But anyway, okay, our fourth major theme is going to be that of justice and righteousness. Justice and righteousness is what is known as a cultural concept that each king and each government surrounding that king was supposed to maintain and supposed to uphold in everyday aspect of life. Okay, justice and righteousness is doing everything that is honorable to the people in which you are ruling over. Okay, taking care of the widow, the orphan, freeing the slaves, maintaining all the cultural things pertaining to making sure that everybody is not being oppressed. Okay, the best way to sum it up is that you either want to be on the side of maintaining justice and righteousness, or you're going to be found as an oppressor. Okay, and the oppressors, ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to tell you is that Yah takes them out, because he is the king of justice and righteousness. Yeshua is his vassal king of justice and righteousness. If we don't see all these elements within what Yah does all throughout the Bible, then how can he say that he's maintaining justice and righteousness throughout all the earth? Okay? Ancient Egypt also believed that justice and righteousness was at the very core of everything that they believed, right down to every single citizen of the kingdom of Egypt. It was known as what was called as Ma'at. Okay, they had a goddess that was surrounded around Ma'at, surrounded around justice and righteousness. And if they did not maintain justice and righteousness the way that they believed, then it determined their afterlife. It determined on where they were going to go after they died. This is nothing new, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, one other thing I want to mention about comparative studies and studying a lot of the ancient Near Eastern stuff that we do is that just because a nation doesn't believe like we do and they do a lot of pagan stuff, doesn't mean that everything that they do is completely wrong. Okay, if I see a nation that is focused on establishing justice and righteousness for their people and maintaining that by taking care of the widow, the orphan, the poor, the homeless, making sure everybody doesn't go hungry, they're no longer slaves, and all of these elements, then that shows us that something was right within the hierarchy of the kingdom. Okay, we know that everything they did after that, or attached to those things and the pagan things that they did, is where they go wrong. But their laws doesn't necessarily make them a pagan nation. Okay, one of the things that I've come to find out is that when new nations are beginning to come into power here in our modern era, is that they'll go back and they'll try to study out whatever ancient cuneiform tablets or ancient writings we have of the Egyptians, because of their focus on justice and righteousness, taking care of the widow, the orphan, the poor, and doing the works within a society that brings equality. Okay, Yah is a king of equity, ladies and gentlemen. There's no second-class citizens. Okay, and just by that statement alone, and what we're going to talk about in the Gospel of John, will show that one brother doesn't have elevational status over the other. Okay, individually, if we're walking within the kingdom, within the government and the covenant of the kingdom that Yah has established for us, then we all have equity. Okay, he doesn't look at one person as greater than the other. Yes, there are various roles, but that doesn't mean that any one person is diminished. Okay, or one role is diminished. It's when we bring a shameful status in not maintaining the justice and righteousness and the works and the deeds that are attached to our covenant that we become diminished and shameful. Okay, so we're going to focus on presenting Yeshua as that vassal king that has been sent to proclaim the justice and righteousness of Yah, because Yah is setting the oppressed free. He is setting the slaves free. He is taking care of the widows, the poor, the orphan, and reestablishing Israel as his firstborn in the eyes of the people, and freeing them, sending us back to our land, allowing the temple to be rebuilt. Because keep in mind, that's what the other element that they would do. The ancient kings, and we see this in the book of Ezra with King Cyrus, is that when a king would rise to power and he wanted to maintain justice and righteousness for those people, is he would set the slaves free, but he would also send them back to their homeland. He would also send them with the ability to rebuild their temple. Okay, and he did all of these things. This is what King Cyrus, ladies and gentlemen, was a shadow picture of the Father. I believe that. Even though he's a pagan king, everything he did for Israel is the same thing that Yah is going to do for us. Okay, so we're going to focus this last theme all throughout the chapters on presenting the Yeshua as the king who is proclaiming that justice and righteousness of Yahweh throughout not only Israel but all the earth. Okay, and then we're going to be able to make the connections is that now, once we see all four of these major themes and discuss all the other things, the other topics that are going to fall within those and within these chapters, is that you and I have a very, very, very high mandate to take this to the nations, to take this to our families, to take it, and I'm going backwards here. I know it's supposed to start with our homes, and then we go to our communities, our congregations, and then if Yah so wills, then he will open up the doors for us to travel to and fro. I believe this. But ladies and gentlemen, we have to be able to return to the cultural context if we're going to be able to understand these things. If we're going to elevate the role of Mashiach, then it's time to go back to the Gospel of John and present it in its proper context. My prayer, ladies and gentlemen, is that, like I said earlier, is that we will bring glory, we will bring honor to Yah and to His Son, to His Messiah Yeshua, and everything attached to the context of the Gospel, because we are also letters, okay? We are written letters. The Torah is written on our hearts. Okay, we are to take Yeshua to the nations, take Yah to the nations and His Word to the nations. So it's my prayer that as we go through this study, that you will allow me the opportunity to take this slower than we've done any other teaching that I've done. And it's going to take us some time. But it's going to be up, you can do it at your leisure. Okay, there's not going to be any rush whatsoever. I would really, really like to have interaction and have comments and questions so we can interact. And that, because we're not going to be able to literally cover every single thing, that every single word, every Greek word, every Hebrew idiom, we're not going to be able to do that. The main focus is not the scholarly. Okay, I'm not a scholar. Most of us are not scholars. Let's be honest. But I believe that Yah is opening up the door, and He wants His Gospels, and He wants His context of His Torah and His Word, His complete covenant, to reach the nations in the way in which He intended. So thank you for taking time today. Hopefully in the introduction we give you enough to think about, enough to contemplate as we begin into chapter 1 here very soon. So thank you, and we'll see you again soon. Shalom.